Every healthy traditional culture had art just as part of the normal flow of life. Folk dancing, ceremonial events before and after. It wasn't just for women or for men or for adults or for children. It was just everybody, often everybody together. And when people were more personally responsible for their everyday goods or the tools that they needed, when the society was integrated and refined and healthy, people were rarely content with the utilitarian. Men would carve the handles of their knives, women would paint their pottery, bead their dresses, weave flowers into their hair. And all of these, it's not that I necessarily look backwards to think that somehow there was a time when human beings were different and they had it easier or something like that. That's not what I'm thinking. It's just more that when you see a natural, healthy, spontaneous expression, sometimes there's a clue there. And I think as our society has gotten more fragmented and artistic expression has become more of a profession than an integrated way of life, I think much that ails our current society could be balanced if we went back a little bit. Even religion and spirituality, because of the influence to a very large extent of Catholic monasteries, in which the idea of self-expression became tied with ego, and ego being the enemy, self-expression becomes the enemy, and we all want to look alike and be alike and just obey rather than initiate. I think we've gotten ourselves really, really confused. And I think among other reasons why Paramhansa Yogananda incarnated and why his disciple Kriyananda, Swamiji, as I call him, had such a rich and extraordinary artistic life, and so did Yogananda, writing music, writing poetry, writing books. It was to set an example, to put footprints in the sand, you might say, of leading us back to a more integrated relationship with creative self-expression, because we're here not to suppress our individual nature, we're here to transcend it. And suppression is not at all the same as transcendence. It just holds the water behind a dam, but it doesn't do anything to, I'll to drain the swamp, if you want to put it like that. But what happens when we transcend it is that we learn that even that which comes through me, I am only the channel for it. It's not really me. And so that's where we're going. We're going into a much healthier, richer, and really actually more satisfying and more beautiful way of understanding how art and creativity integrate, not merely with spiritual life, but just with wholesome life. I had a very interesting experience. I'm not much of a visual artist, although I have a very highly developed sense of beauty and design and a visual sense, but I've rarely done anything besides sewing that has to do with making things that you look at. But I was with a friend. I was living in the house with a friend and her husband during the last 6 weeks of her life on Earth. She had terminal cancer and had entered into hospice. We had all moved in together with another couple who were friends of ours, and at various times other friends were also living in this house. We were sort of just all together. The hospital bed was in the living room, and the living room, dining room was the only communal room, so we were all just together. I was there for about 3 or 4 weeks. And at a certain point in that process, there were all these collage materials at hand, because when she had been healthier, she herself had done collage, and many of her friends had done collage with her. So at a certain point, there were all these collage materials at hand, because when she'd been healthier, she and her friends had done collage. And I have never done collage, and I have to admit I was a bit of a snob about collage, is the only thing I can say. But I brought the whole thing out on the table, and for a week, I just made one collage after another. I thought about them when I was falling asleep. Sometimes I dreamt about them. It was the first thing I thought of when I got up. And I made about 4 or 5 of these collages, just in the normal way it's done, just to please my own eye. Interestingly, I thought they were insignificant. And I'm not a person who keeps things. So after my friend died and the whole thing was over, I picked up those collages to throw them away. I couldn't. It was very interesting to me. I just couldn't throw them away. I tried to throw them away over the next few years, because she died a few years ago. I could never throw them away. Finally, I had them laminated. And I can't really say what they mean to me, but I know that the act of expressing myself in an artistic way at a time that was so poignant and so real for me on so many different levels was integral to the beauty and, I would say, the spirituality of the whole experience. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it have been wonderful if we had been dancing and singing, if we had a whole tradition that was all related to helping this person pass and helping us help her pass. Of course, in the Ananda communities that I live in, we do have many such traditions, but we're still at the very beginning of really understanding, of really integrating artistic self-expression in the way that a truly wholesome culture would do. But at least we're on the cusp of it. Now, in serious artistic self-expression, or meaning what I would say, what is karmically more important to me is words. Speaking, which I have been doing for decades, and writing, which is something that's really come to the fore more in the last 10 or 15 years of my life. But through the effort to write, which is a full, concentrated, is by no means an adjunct, it's a central self-definition. What is necessary for me to be able to fulfill my fullest potential as a writer, whether or not it's accepted by the world, recognized by the world at all, is entirely incidental to it from my point of view, because everything that is required of me in order to attune myself, to transcend my ego, in order to be an instrument for the creative flow that is the potential of my incarnation, requires of me the highest and the best of which I am capable. And in my 50 years on the spiritual path and 73 years of life, nothing else has focused my own, I want to use the word self-discipline, but has focused my own aspirations as a person as deeply as artistic self-expression. And to add another piece to it, I really have to say, even though I've been a meditator for these 50 years, when I am attuned and creating artistically, I think those have been the deepest spiritual experiences I've had, because in order to do it properly, it is an act of total self-forgetfulness. We sometimes think of self-realization as a super inflated, steroid-driven, perfect image of who I think I am, when in fact it's exactly the opposite, which is the one that we normally think of as ourselves, which is really the ego. And I don't mean ego such an enemy, but it's just that limited self-identification. In order to be a channel of true creativity, that ego has to just simply take a holiday. That's what transcendence is. Suppression, there's no flow of energy to replace the suppressed energy. Transcendence is that the lesser is just moved aside or washed away, you might say, by this greater flow of energy. And that self-forgetfulness in the flow of creative energy, that is in actual fact, that's a definition of God. And that only happens, of course, when the aspiration is to serve. If the artistic self-expression is for self-indulgence or for revenge or whatever it might be, I don't believe the experience will be transcending. It still might be uplifting, and it also might be health-producing, because one can also work out complicated psychological issues. One can learn things about oneself that one didn't know. Self-revelation can take place. So there are many stages, all of which are positive. But in the context of my life, where the the goal, the focal point, which has been true for decades, is this kind of self-transcendence, then everything that I do in this respect leads to that. And I believe for all of us, it's a directional reality, whatever your goal in life is, that when we can integrate artistic, creative self-expression, regardless of the product, it's the process itself that the heart longs to experience.